record it, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, well, my pathway to Aikido. My son at 7 was training in Aikido, and I would go to pick him up, but it never ever occurred to me that this would be something I would do. And I did a 10-day Lomi School workshop in the San Francisco Bay Area with Richard Heckler and his group, and I got introduced to Aikido. And for an afternoon, I took to it like a duck in water. And at the end of the 4 hours of, the introduction, the teacher had us all do, we're just going to do a straight Boken strike, right? I'm going to do a straight Boken strike and, get off the line. So I was watching everybody do this. Came my turn. I'm there. The sword raises. It's coming down. I didn't cover. I didn't duck. I didn't move. I was like completely frozen. And when I was finished with that workshop, that's when I went to Aikido West with Sensei Frank Duran and find out. I wanted to know what that was. What was that? So I trained as a typically abled student for 11 years, and then returning from a Aikido event, week-long training, I fell asleep at the wheel and the car rolled. I ended up with a broken neck and with no movement past the tops of my shoulders, and that was the diagnosis for life. But I had a lot of data that they didn't have. I was a yoga person, a continuum person, an Aikido person, a dance person, a breath person, and I was immersed in this community of Aikido, all we touchy-feely people, and everybody just kind of gathered around, and I used my knowledge and everybody's support to recover to the place where I can stand and ambulate with balance support. And I continued training. I did my 3rd degree and my 4th degree, and then just in January was promoted to 5th Dan along with Jeramy.
Many congratulations.
Yeah, and I'm certainly I'm hugely grateful for this community of Aikidoists, because nobody skipped the beat with me.
We'll come back to that, if we may.
Yeah.
Right.
Your turn, Jeramy. Tell us your story.
So my story is the first time that I became aware of Aikido, I was working in a bookstore in downtown Palo Alto, very close to Stanford University, and the bookstore sold books on self-awareness and meditation, and in that area, in that genre, and people were always coming in, and I would hear stories about this group of people who were training in this martial art that I'd never heard of called Aikido at Stanford. Of course, Duran Sensei, he founded that club there as a subsidiary club to Aikido West, which was his and our home dojo. But I decided to go check it out because I was interested in martial arts, and I was in the military. And when I lived in Japan for a couple of years, in way northern Japan, I actually studied a little bit of Okinawan karate, of all things. But I went to the Stanford Aikido class, and Duran Sensei and another longtime Aikidoist, Foster Gamble, were teaching there. And the mat was full of people. There was about 50 people on the mat, and everyone had a gi except for me. And I was invited to participate in the class, and so I did. And the funny thing is, it was one of the strangest experiences that I ever had, because I couldn't figure out why people were falling down. I really felt like, what? This is all I didn't get the level of agreement, and I didn't understand the level of agreement, and I didn't understand the whole concept. So I left kind of scratching my head, especially after my prior experience of Okinawan karate, and went on about my life. And years later, when I met Molly and we came together, Molly had been training for about 4 years, and we wanted to do stuff together. We were both really active, and we wanted to do stuff together. So I went to the dojo, and the rest is history. I fell in love immediately with it, and was welcomed with open arms at Aikido West. And Molly was at Aikido West. She was everybody's darling. So I got well taken care of. So, that's the short story of it. And of course, trained ever since. It's an amazing, amazing art.
Yeah. Done. Hands up.
Jeramy, could I ask what changed between when you first went and when you went with Molly in terms of you liking Aikido?
Well, the first time I went, when I had that experience, this was a one-off. So never having seen it before, never having observed it before, went right into training in a class, and nobody else was. There were other beginners there, but not like I was a beginner. So I didn't get it, and I had no background to get it, and there was no precursor or any kind of research done on my part before that. Then when I went back and I did it, it wasn't a one-off. I went in and I went again and again and again. And actually, when I started, I trained 7 days a week for 5 to 7 days a week for about 10 years. And and just in the doing and the practice, it's different from being introduced to something and you try it one time and you go, okay. So,
Okay, so I think your journey is unusual in many respects because you had this natural point where you had the accident, Molly, and obviously that didn't allow you to train for a little while, not on the mat. And very clearly, your journey has been so clearly a practice off the mat as well as on it. You really had to bring to bear what you'd gleaned from Aikido prior to having the accident into real life and really make it work for you. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, again, this immersion in this community of care, we're practicing love. So everybody, showed up. They really made it easy for me to engage fully with what was. And I always say, in growing up, my father was the president of the Optimist Club. So I had this thick in my body was to look at what was possible, which I find in Aikido, you're looking for where the joining is, where the harmony is in movement. And so that's what I brought to bear. I thought I was patient before, but the level of patience, I'm still plumbing the depths of patience all these years later, because if I drop something on the floor and need to pick it up, it's quite the time-consuming effort. And so Aikido just simply plays through how when something presents itself and it's pretty confronting, I've got the training to just go with it. Would I have come as far without it? The interesting question, because I had so much other data. As a competitive swimmer for most of my youth, I knew how to train and keep layering and go backwards and then go forward. So I had all of this weaved with Aikido.
Yeah.
You know, how many times have I done Ikkyo? You know, and continue to find more movement in it.
Yeah.
35 years later.
Having watched the video that was made about you two yesterday, I want to tell everybody that yes, your dojo was amazingly accommodating, but it's because you had the will to go back and make it happen. You wouldn't give up. So yes, but you created the situation where they had to be accommodating. They were very supportive, but it would be so easy for you to have backed off and just given up, and you didn't. And the second thing that springs to mind is that, you know, most of us train for years, decades and decades, and then we're forced to take observance of the nuances, the tiny things, where you were forced to do it quite early in your Aikido career because that was all there was for you. So maybe by the way, Jeremy, I do want to ask you exactly the same question because I think it was just as profound a change for you as it was for Molly. But just wanted to talk about that point a little bit, about the picking up the subtleties.
You're asking me
I
to
am,
pick up
yeah.
subtleties.
Because that's all you had, wasn't it?
Well, you know, in the beginning, you know, for the 2 months that I lived at Stanford Hospital, I had 2 meals that was fixed in the kitchen. All my breakfast, lunch, and dinner was all brought to me by the Aikido family, if you will. And they had to feed me, you know, they basically had to do everything. And being that so much of Aikido is transmitted through touch, and I had doctors suggesting that people shouldn't be touching me. Weird. But, you know, again, the community was willing to move beyond a structure that said no. And that's a very subtle thing in Aikido, yes?
Indeed.
You know, so something comes in. For me, as training as I am now, you know, a teacher can demonstrate a technique, and if my, let's say, uke comes in a different way, I'm not doing that technique. I am going with the natural movement that is expressed. Otherwise, I'm forcing. So one of the things that this has taught me is I don't force. I allow things to develop.
Yes, I like that.
And again, you know, when I did my Shodan exam in Aikido, and the next day, you know, I'm there on for the first time, and Sensei said something about doing, you know, Shomanuchi Ikkyo, Irimi, and my mind went completely blank. I mean, it's like I'm standing, it's like, well, oh my gosh, you know, what is that? Well, it's very, I've had to use that lack of knowing in a moment constantly. Because, you know, I don't know from day to day whether what I was able to do yesterday, I'm going to be able to do today. It's, and so the Aikido just keeps me engaged in the whole process.
So you kind of forced to work with empty mind, whether you liked it or not.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Okay, can I focus on Jeramy now? Jeramy, as I said, I think the story is just as profound for you. So tell us how it affected your Aikido journey, and which was very much off the mat as well as on it, more off it.
Well, you know, geez, when this whole event happened, our life was radically changed in an instant, and none of us really knew. Most of all, Molly and I, what anything was going to look like, and all we knew is that everything was kind of, you know, our paradigm had been shattered, and so, it was all about adaptation and flexibility and being in the moment. And it actually took, like, I know that for me to recover from the shock of the incident and the radical, profound change to our life, which nobody ever asked me or us about it. At year 7 after this event, in year 7, I suddenly had an epiphany, and I realized that for 7 years I had been shocked.
You need to come a little nearer the microphone. You're fading a little.
Ah.
No, I can't hear you at all now. Hang on.
Okay.
Yeah, I suddenly heard you again. Yes, you came back.
So, let me see. You
were in year 7. Start from there.
So I was in shock. I had this epiphany in year 7 that I had been in shock for the last 7 years. And in that moment, something freed up in me in my realization that I had, it was a form of PTSD. I didn't even know what it was. I had been so impacted and affected, and our lives had so radically changed that really it sent me into a shock syndrome. And when I came out of that, everything changed. I had a different attitude. I had a different level of understanding. And it was at that point that I really was able to begin being in that moment and going, okay, what do we have to work with? As you and I have talked very little about the idea that, in my experience, I feel that 98% of Aikido does not happen in the dojo. It happens outside the dojo. We go to the dojo, we train. Many of us have trained for 3-4 decades, for however long. Yet most of our time and lives are not spent in the dojo, even with all of that length of training. It happens outside the dojo. So how does the practice apply then to moment to moment? And it was that epiphany and my coming out of the shock that I realized, oh, this is what, at least for me, I can only speak for myself, this is what my Aikido is about. It's about learning how to recognize what is happening in the moment and adapt and adjust and apply positive life force to it, if at all possible. I feel like there is for lack of a better word, there is some kind of an invisible alchemy for me in the practice of Aikido. That through the practice and O-sensei's teachings and other teachers' teachings of that we're not really training to be fighters. We're training to connect with ourselves and understand ourselves, and yet at the same time, it is done through a paradigm of movement, so that we begin to recognize and understand the dynamics of movement and the science, martial science, and how it gets applied to movement. And so things radically changed for me in terms of, most of the time when we train Aikido, it's all the same anyway. It's not like it's a surprise attack. We set up forms, and they're almost like katas, and in which they're study forms. Shomanuchi Ikkyo, Omote is a study form. Nage knows how Uke is going to come in, and Uke knows more or less what to expect. We don't know how fast it's going to be. We don't know how forceful it's going to be, and all of those things. But there's this alchemy that happens just through the study of the movement that I think permeates and has permeated into my being, a sense of, wow, not only does it bring health, but it brings me a way to actually study my own reactions in real time on the mat. When we touch each other, we instantly know so much about each other just through how we grab each other's wrists or grab each other's shoulders, or how the technique feels on one end of another, whether we're uke or nage. And there's so much, again, that the word that comes up for me is alchemy. There's so much alchemy in that relationship and connection that has been so useful for me in terms of the study of how do I use this in my life. And then, of course, to Nana every day, we're out in the world and we go to the store and we have relationships with people and we meet people. And even if it's only for a second and we say hello, we realize the power of the alchemy of relationships, and even a smile or the way we treat each other. That's Aikido to me. It's like, Sensei said, Budo is love, and how do we manifest that in our lives? Again, it's not about domination. Nage always wins unless we're practicing Kaishiwaza. It's a setup. Nage will always prevail in the art because that's the agreement that we have. So I could go on and talk about that for a long time in terms, but I don't want to get too, I can go all over the place with this, but it's that off the mat practice that really where it shows up in our lives, I think.
Sure, absolutely. So, although I have been in touch with you over quite a long period of time, we've only chatted a couple of times for real, and this is the second time. But I kind of feel that you have incredibly rich lives, and in fact, it might be the richer for the accident. What's your opinion?
Well,
yes,
we certainly would not have had the experience that we're having. It has definitely altered things. Somebody asked me one time, we were like in a group and everybody was going back, yeah, if you could take back 1 minute of your life, what would it be? But the richness of this experience, the people that I've met, I never would have come in contact with without this experience. And for me, the accident, which I always refer to as almost like a strategic strike, since there were 4 of us in the car and it was only me, it was my mantle, and I've brought all my prior experience and the Aikido to this healing process, to this living process, and I clearly have been able to be a light, if you will, for other people that are dealing with their different ability, just in the world in general, and definitely on the mat. Definitely on the mat.
I couldn't agree more. You wear the mantle with grace and style, I have to say. Which brings us very nicely to the sort of topic that we're kind of looking at. We're looking at inclusivity on the mat. And you were made to feel very included, despite the accident. But I imagine you have had experience of people thinking, really, what's going on here? So, and people I'm going to deliberately use this word, they will describe you as disabled. How do you feel when people regard you that way? And what have your experiences been of being treated as disabled?
Well, I always say, don't diss my ability, because we're all differently abled in some way, shape, or form. I found that, sometimes people will, if I'm with somebody, it doesn't happen anymore, but in the early days, it would be like, what do you think she might like? Right? So that I'd be there, they would like, it was really interesting, as an adult woman to have people just like have assumptions about my mental ability or whatever. And soon, I knew how to do little Tenkan stuff around that, but eventually Irimi was my entry point, to say, well, I actually can respond to your questions. It also being a grown up, and when in the early days when everything had to be done for me. I mean, I couldn't eat. I had this, that was it. That in my mouth, pretty much. So I never lost my ability to talk, which was good. But in present day, because I had a shaman one time tell me, said, Molly, as you grow older, you have two choices. You either can become invisible or outrageous. And it was easy for me to choose the outrageous part. So I stick out, I mean, I stick out. I've got oftentimes feather boas on my chair, and, I'm decorated, and I'm open. One of the things in Aikido, right? You learn to be in your upright posture, and I'm neither defensive or an offensive. I'm just present. And that makes a huge difference when I'm moving through the world. I'm not looking down. I'm totally engaging. And so I get to engage, and in traveling in the world in different dojos and things like that, people have been very generous with their acceptance. The only thing that ever pops up every once in a while is they get concerned that maybe my wheelchair will damage the mat. It never has, which is really fortunate. I've been carried up, 3 flights of stairs to get into dojos. I've had, other people who with disabilities will say, oh, you mean you're okay with being carried? And I'm like, yeah, actually. It's kind of pleasant, really, to wrap my arms around people and get, moved from place to place. It's I was just going to come to a point. The Aikido community, I mean, I taught at the Aiki Expo in the first one and the second one and the third one. And that was, very interesting for me, because oftentimes I'd have some, giant 6'3", 250-pound guy, usually male, grab a hold of my wrist. And when he ends up on the mat in front of me, looking up at me with this sort of startled, well, how did that happen? So I sometimes get challenged, well, does this really work? And, or is everybody just being kind and falling down for me? Right. Oh no, well, they're just falling down. Well, actually, they're falling down because I've managed to engage their balance. Okay. And sweep them off their feet.
So you've had a very positive experience in how you're received.
Yeah,
okay.
Really.
Do you think that that's generally the case for others who have issues that may not be as obvious yours, but they have issues?
It depends on the dojo. It depends on the individual dojo and how the dojo cho, if you will, is receptive. And we got somebody coming through here. Most dojo cho are totally, they might on occasion get a little bit of consternation in their face, but then they open up. And then for me at least, there's this, how do we work with you? Let's do this. For other people coming in, again, it depends on who they're coming into. Aikido West is totally welcoming. Pretty much every dojo that I have had occasion to be with are welcoming. They just are. And like you say, I'm obvious. I'm coming in a wheelchair. I have friends that train who are deaf. I have friends who train who are blind. Friends who are training that have various levels of CP, of cerebral palsy. And, you know, my thing with people is if you cannot train standing up, well, then sit down. You know, put some tennis balls on the bottom of a chair, put it on the mat, and train. And a lot of what I hear is they're embarrassed, particularly people who are teaching. They don't want to do that. And so they stop training because they can't do the typical beautiful, expressive, on your feet movement. And I've had occasion lately to actually work with people who the only way they can train right now is from seated.
Right.
And they're doing it. And they're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, I'm going to just refer back to the documentary that was made and say that, remind people that your training really was as much off the mat, more off the mat than it was on the mat. And that it took an incredible, I mean, so often people on the mat have a little problem, you know, going on in their lives, and they don't train for a week, and then it's 2 weeks, and then it's 3, and then they've stopped practicing altogether. And you never, ever stopped. You just kept on and on and on, and look at the riches it's brought you. And I just think that's a wonderful lesson to share with people. Don't let shit get in the way, basically. Can we open up the rest of the room and see if everybody else, because I know there are people here that have had a different experience to you. Let's see how they found things. So let me just unmute people. Okay, you are now all unmuted, gang. So would anyone like to ask a question or have something that they would like to offer at this point?
I would, if I may.
Yeah, please, Robert.
Lovely to see you both, and as well as everybody else on the call. One of the things that impressed me most consistently, Molly, and this was true when you were still in your hotel room, and I wasn't there yet, but is the extent to which you exuded gratitude, and the power of that gratitude that made everybody, I mean, like you talk about Aikido West being very welcoming, the extent to which you were welcoming of all the people into your, you know, hospital room, all the people into your home who would come by and, you know, in my case, scratch your head to get the glass out, you know, and you know, massage your hands and stuff. I mean, there was Aikido happening in those interactions, and you didn't have a lot of physical movements to offer, but you had a smile and the crinkles around your eyes, and you could still talk, of course. But I was continually amazed at the power of gratitude. And the reason I'm mentioning is not just to say you were great, because that's not news to anybody here. But what are your thoughts as to how other people trying to enter a dojo, you know, where there might be some resistance out of the fear that, you know, oh, we may hurt them, or how can we do this safely? And, you know, using the almost gratitude as an atemi in those moments. What are your thoughts?
Oh man, Rob. I mean, I figure every day that I wake up and breathe is a day of gratitude, right? It's, wow. You know, gratitude rides on an open heart, if you will. And again, I find most Aikidoists open-hearted. And in terms of welcoming somebody who's differently abled into a dojo, stillness and observation, and actually standing in gratitude that they would even consider doing this art. So I know that everybody that I've trained with has advanced their humanity. Does that make sense? Something has happened that shifts an interior thought, an interior idea about possibility and connection. It's something that I think Aikido fosters in people.
Good answer.
More?
Okay, I'm going to ask Steve, because Steve's on the call and he's blind, and his experience of being blind hasn't been as positive as yours. So Steve, would you like to tell us a little bit about what it's been like for you?
It's been very difficult in the early days, especially owing to the fact that people cannot understand that a blind person can teach Aikido. You don't have to see to teach. And the problem, it got to the stage where I would go on a course and be left in a corner, and that would be it. You know, but then I got guide dogs eventually, and I thought, well, that helped me make a visual representation instead of a white stick of what one does. But it was very much harder in the late 60s, 70s, and 80s to even find a good teacher who would take those sort of things on board. I think a lot of it is fear or ego, or a bit of both, I think, with some of the teaching methods. But
what do you think is required to make anybody who turns up at a club feel welcome? I mean, sometimes, what's required, Steve?
I think if you're treated normally, then you can be normal as well. But I like to be wacky a bit, like Molly. I'm not.
No insult intended, Molly.
No, I know, I do it.
You know, I mean, it's to be welcoming in a club. It's so good because Aikido friendships are usually for life, and it's keeping students in the dojo, which is more difficult when you have, because no one actually believes you can teach in the first place. So you train up students; they become your eyes, a part of the responsibility of looking after you on the mat as well. So the whole thing filtered down. But it is difficult for dojos. Now, I did a little bit of research recently, because I've been locked down for the last 22 weeks here. But anyway, and it turns out that there aren't many people doing Aikido with a disability in the UK as such. You know, but in the US there probably is more, I would guess. But I mean,
not much really. The only place that I've found where they really, really support inclusivity in Aikido is in France. They actually, France and Holland. You know,
right.
there's an intent to include, and it's just a little bubble in the United States.
What do they do that's different in France and Holland?
They have teachers that welcome. They have teachers that are advanced that are teaching from wheelchairs. You've got Lydia in Holland. You have Magli in France. And then in the UK, you've got on the island.
Royston?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Roisin.
Machine, yeah.
Yeah. So there's that. So there's
Yeah, there are a few examples.
go ahead.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'd like to add something to this. You know, one of the things, you know, Molly, following this accident and then having a new paradigm, Molly and I being together, and also with the interest still being a normal interest of wanting to continue in our Aikido practice, being together, we were able to apply being in the moment in a different kind of a situation. Hang on a second, just push on that. Push on
If you'll just let me do it.
Okay.
They can see you, sweetie.
Yeah.
They can see you.
Sorry.
You didn't disappear.
Our screen disappeared.
Yeah.
It made me feel like I disappeared. So it was very interesting. You know, Shiho Nage, every technique looks different when Molly and I do it together, or if anybody does it with Molly. It has to be adapted. Molly does not get off the line like we were taught to do. Molly does not do Tenkan like we were taught to do. Molly does not do Imrimi like we were taught to do. Everything needs to be looked at and re-looked at and studied and applied now to this new specific kind of circumstance. And so what we did was we realized, like, okay, Molly doesn't move, but she can draw her partner to her. She can make them move around her instead of her moving around them. All these subtleties, which we do in a normal practice as well, but now it becomes the norm, and we had to look at everything. When I take ukemi from Molly, I have to be set. It really made my quote unquote regular practice with normally abled people. I feel like it made me way more sensitive and responsive and better in terms of how I felt in my body, because I had to be more responsive to Molly. If she drew me in, I followed. Yeah, I could have stood back and done this, but that's not what our practice is. Hold on, Dan, I'll be with you in a sec. So on the ukemi side, I had to learn, I have to move around Molly's chair. I have to be sensitive to her moving me instead of her, doing like normal things as we were taught to do. So everything changed. And as I say, in the changing of that, it really expanded my practice and our practice. And then for Molly as a teacher, she could go in and say, hey, there's more touch involved, like Steve being a person who is blind, and now it's all about touch. Touch becomes even more important, and how do you evolve touch, and how do you use touch? How do you learn how to read your partner? How do you all those things? Well, it takes a lot of study and time and sensitivity to develop these things.
Molly, how do you deal with the ukemi side of things?
Well,
I don't mean you haven't got to be thrown about, but it's the experience of that.
if I'm in my chair, I take ukemi in the biggest, deepest stretch that I can do with my partner. Right.
So it's part removing exercise.
Yeah. And if I'm sitting on the mat, then I can actually do some appearance of ukemi and actually get pinned and things like that. So it depends on whether I'm seated on the mat or whether I'm in the chair.
It's a
Okay.
different practice.
Done.
Yeah, it's a different practice if you're sitting in a chair, or if you, whatever differently abled abilities you have to adapt. You have to be creative, how to adapt. So, you know, Molly doesn't fall. I don't throw her to the ground when I do kotagaishi or shihonage. She go flying out of the chair. It's not a good practice, but we go up to a point where it's a nice stretch, and she feels it, and I take her, and then also that helps me also develop my sensitivity as nage, and to, you know, how far do I, or we need to take this when in our training with each other.
In many ways,
I've only been flipped out of my chair in 25 years. I've only been flipped out of my chair about 4 times.
And not by me, by the way.
No.
Jeremy,
So Dan has a question.
Jeremy, just as part of your exploration and your relationship with Molly on the mat, dare I say it, have you put yourself in her place to the point? Have you sat in a chair and tried to see it from her point of view, just to see how you have to react and how differently you have to perform, so you can understand the uke nage role a bit better?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, in fact, sometimes when Molly teaches, she gets everybody in a chair, and you can't move from the chair. So now you can't do your normal practice anymore. How are you going to adapt? And really, isn't that what we're doing every moment in life anyway? And isn't that what aikido is about? It's about what's happening in this moment. It's not me forcing this round thing into this square hole all the time just because that's how I learned it. It's like, you know, it's way deeper and more profound than that. Especially if you've been practicing for years and years and years, you go deeper because you have to. Otherwise, doesn't it get boring if it's the same old, same old, same old? Same old up and down. We work in a little box of techniques like this. Oh, we always do this. Well, that lasts for only so long. There's so much more, because it's not about technique, it's about principle.
We're getting to the heart of what inclusivity is all about for me. And you made the really important point, Jeremy, that you had to adapt to what Molly could do. And that's what we all have to do with every single partner we practice with. It's just the width, the breadth of how we have to adapt is sometimes a much narrower. But our whole art is about being adaptable and including what's in front of us at that particular point in time. So yes, profound point. Jackie, you have made a bit of an art of teaching the blind, and putting together a course for that. Would you like to talk about that a bit?
Yes, actually, I had a big project about inclusivity for both movement impaired and sight impaired persons, and see how we can be adaptive in a dojo as a whole for persons with those kinds of disabilities. And it was a 2-year project that was extended 1 extra year. And I actually visited Molly before I started the project and had some input from her on some many questions and myths I had in my own head on how it would be to work together with people of different abilities. And that was really, really helpful. She had some really good insights. It's like, oh, just adapt. You just find a way.
So what were the main things that what were the big things that shifted in your mind?
Well, I'm a bit like Molly. I'm a Tenkan kind of person. I mean, if something happens, I can't do it, I'll find a way. I'll turn around and find a different perspective where I can adapt something into something that looks like an ikkyo, if that's the task at hand. So I'm a very adaptive person throughout my life. I've been. But the question is how to bring this adaptability into other people's lives. Because most people are looking for something, you know, safe, square, something to fit in, to feel safe in. And if anything deviates from that, it makes a person feel unsafe, either themselves or the other person they interact with. So I think it's correct. Somebody said that this is what, I think it's Jeremy said that we practice aikido and it's never the same. We have to adapt all the time. And we do it in small ways, in small safe ways, which are katas. And then later when we go into randori, unexpected stuff happen and we can deal with it. But we need to build ourselves up to that point. And I think inclusivity is also one of those things that we have to practice. Dealing with people who are different, who think differently, have a different perspective. And a good way to do that is to do it in a physical way. And then bring that off the mat into dealing with people of different personalities and so on.
So can I bring you back to the sort of, you had some preconceptions about what it would be like to teach people that are differently abled. So what were those preconceptions that Molly ripped away?
A more curiousness in my case. I met a lot of myths and people that you can't do it. It's not aikido anymore if you can't move your feet. This kind of attitude you meet into several people who are completely, you know, you say a lot of people are inclusive, but I've met the contrary. People don't want to deal with people with disabilities. And okay, maybe the dojos are not the right place for differently able people to go to, because there is no openness towards that. And I think that should be fine too. We can't make everybody be open. So let's find the ways that are open that we can flow with and create something new that then other people can emulate. I've had messages from people from some of this stuff I've posted. Is like, I didn't think it was possible to practice Aikido with blind people. How can you, you know? Or how can you sit on a chair and do Aikido? And some people got their mind open just by seeing it was possible. It just blew their mind. Yeah. I think Paul is trying to say something.
Paul, yes, go. Paul, do you
Paul, you're muted.
You need to unmute it.
Yeah.
I can't do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a couple of comments. One, long before my Parkinson's, I was teaching people in chairs, wheelchairs, and the first experience I had was they said, if they push me, I can't do anything. They just control my movement. I said, great. And I didn't know why I said it, but I sat down in a chair, and the chair said to me, oh, great, now I've got some movement I can use. And I dragged my fingers on one of the wheels, and I found that I could clip the guy's ankles with my footrest and break them. So I discovered right away, by accepting the movement, instead of saying they can move me and I can't control it, and now I had movement. And so within a few weeks, all these people who are saying I can't were saying, oh great, he's going to push me, and now I have some power to use. The other thing is, this morning on a run, I've had Parkinson's for 17 years, and I also have a shodan in an Okinawan style of karate, which I like a lot in certain ways. But all of a sudden this morning, I realized what they mean by fighting spirit. You see them banging their hands against trees, punching rocks, all kinds of crazy shit. And what they're doing is they're overcoming the tendency to say, I can't do that, it hurts, I don't like that. You bull through it, you break through it. Aikidos, we don't break through, we sort of weasel our way through or something. But it's much the same, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. Wonderful, thank you, Paul. Anybody else got anything they would like to add or offer?
I'd like to offer one more thought.
Go.
Sometimes there's a problem the other way. I mean, the disabled people are trying to find a place that's inclusive, but sometimes there are dojos who would like to do more, to be more open, but they can't reach out to the community of differently abled people. That's my biggest problem, is to reach out to a group of blind people. I want to start a class for the blind, but I can't find any, you know, or so this is there's a communication gap here where the need needs to meet the demand. Oh, well, how do you say that? The demand, yeah, and the offer need to meet somewhere. So this is something that we can do more of, is, for example, through the working group, the IAF working group for disabilities. Maybe we can start something there to open a challenge, a communication channel where we can put the offering and the need together in some way. So this is my challenge for everybody here. I saw Kei Sawa was there too. Yeah. So let's do something there.
Yeah.
You might want to just mention, Molly or Jackie, I know that Lydia's put together this paper that basically talks about how you can deal with anybody that steps on your mat, no matter what their issues are. Do you want to just talk about that a little bit? Because there is information out there.
Oh, Lydia's book. Gosh, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's a handbook for coaches.
Yeah.
For working with differently abled people on the mat. Yeah. And I can post a link somewhere for it, because
I've got it too.
Really, yeah, that would be great, because it's a good reference. It's a good resource. Lydia started Aikido after she became a wheelchair user, and so she's got a different perspective from how do you begin. I was already there, so it just, I'd had 11 years of typical practice, and that served me. It really served me. Yeah. In terms of inclusivity and welcoming people, I've done some workshops at the VA, and with spinal cord injured, mostly men show up. And what I have typically found is that in their base, they want MMA, right? I'm coming in, I'm showing Aikido and how you can be harmonious and not harm your partner and all those kind of things. And they're wanting to, for want of a better word, they're wanting to take out the other person. Yeah. And so there's not a blend in that arena. So I was never able to get a class of a regular class with people that in that genre, in the military, who had been injured. It wasn't something that settled in, where I would think that if you were in the military, you'd want to be dealing with peds. But,
Just to say that Rob's posted that link into the chat, so if anybody wants to take a note of it, they can find it. We're going to post that link on Aiki Extension's site too. I think we'll open up a sort of subject matter on this. And I've been in communication with a number of people who have various issues. And what we're trying to do is give it more of a human feel, maybe write about their personal experiences and stories. So surround the technical stuff with what a difference it makes for the people on the receiving end, but also for the teachers too. I think that might be quite a nice idea. And maybe we'll set up some discussion forums on there as well. We're opening up a new social media site on Aiki Extensions that will allow people to talk about whatever they've got to talk about.
Well, one of the things for me that I think is a critical path for me is to actually start posting the training, the teaching, so people can get a feel by seeing, yes, by witnessing, that this is how you join, and here is your seated posture, or if you're dealing with CP, how do you move about? There's those things. So I think that actually creating a video library.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because they've created this thing called the Aikido University, and I think they're crying out for you to put what you know down in there. Let's have it for posterity, please. You are in a fairly unique, you have a unique perspective, having been both sides of the chair, so to speak. And I think you've got something very valuable to offer as a couple.
Yeah.
The other thing that springs to mind, which is going to be a subject for another week, is we're going to be covering Aikido and playing with your shadow. Really, the big practice is playing with your shadow and learning to overcome that, learning to love yourself. It occurs to me there must have been many, many times on your joint journey where that seemed like a really tough ask. Would you like to talk about that at all? Must have been moments of huge doubt and hating what you found within.
Wow. Okay, let me just say that when people have asked me, you know, didn't you ever feel sorry for yourself or blah, blah, blah? Didn't happen. The question was not why me. It was, for me, it was why not me. When I looked at the kit bag I had, so to speak, all of the, like I'd been in training for this. Through Continuum, I worked with a teacher who worked at with a physician at UCLA, working with quadriplegics and paraplegics, and through her work, I knew that these people who had been quads for like 10 years were now crawling. I had this information. I, again, from training, I know how to train and train and train and have the appearance of not going forward and actually have the appearance of going backwards. It's like, it was never, it just hasn't been a place of down or pity. I mean, yeah, I have a little room inside of my head where every once in a while, if I feel I'm feeling contracted, which is really rare for me to feel contracted in my life. But when I feel contracted in my life, I go into this little room inside of my head, pull up my favorite blanket and into my favorite chair, and I sit there and I be contracted. And I find that contraction, well, it's contracted and I don't like it much. So I don't stay in that spot very often. I simply move out because I know that there's so much more than contraction. There's so much more. Why live there? So I just don't do that.
Fantastic. Jeremy, same for you?
Pardon me?
Was it the same for you?
Well, different. Probably arriving at the same place, but a very different way. I went through some real rough times. And you and I had a little conversation about that as well. But for the first number of years after Molly's accident, Molly got a lot of attention, very understandable. I was invisible to almost everyone. As weird as that sounds, when they made the documentary film, which maybe some of you have seen, it's free to watch, by the way, and I think Quentin will probably post a link.
I already have. I posted the link in the chat.
Yeah, after the filmmaker followed us around for a year and had put together a bunch of work, and she showed it to her community, and I wasn't in the film at all after a year. It was only about, it was destined to be a 15-minute film about Molly and this challenge that she had been meeting. And after she showed the film to her community of supporters, the community said, well, wait a minute, what about her husband? And what about what's going on there? So she, I won't say reluctantly, but she kind of said, okay, well, maybe maybe we'll interview Jeramy and we'll see what happens. So they set up this interview, and she began to ask me questions about, how I felt and what I thought about and how it was for me. And it was the first time in about 5 years since this thing had happened that anyone asked me what I felt. And I was like, exploded, you know, because I had had a tough time, because not only did my life change, but you know, it wasn't easy to move through it. As a caregiver, when Molly first was injured, they said to her she would have no voluntary movement from the top of her shoulders down for the rest of her life. And they looked at me and said, "This is going to be your life, bud." And I kind of was like, and like I said, I was in shock. And I was in shock for 7 years, but I was in shock when they told me that already. And it was like, oh, you know, I didn't know what to do with it. And I had a real rough time, especially with the invisibility aspect of it, because Molly got a lot of attention. I got none. And I had to find a way to move through that. And because it wasn't about me, it wasn't about anyone per se. It was like, how do we move through what is before us? Like what has been dished up? There's no running from it. And you know, one of the things that in the interview that I had, it did not end up in the film documentary, but it was part of the interview, is that I was very clear, like when Molly and I came together and we met and we fell in love and we decided to, like, okay, let's do this. A big reason why Molly and I came together for me was because she was so positive and she was such a beautiful, loving, light being on the planet. And that's what I wanted around me. And that's the kind of partner and the kind of people that I wanted to be around. And then after this event happened, we met many, many, many people who had gone through similar experiences. And many of them were resentful, bitter, angry, all kinds of levels of pissed off. And they were not very pleasant to be around. And as a result, almost 100% of those relationships, they split up. And that's a standard statistic. When somebody in a relationship, one of the partners has a traumatic injury, they, you know, very few of those relationships last. Well, what happened for me was Molly did not change as a person. She did not become angry or bitter or resentful or any of those things. And then I had to face myself on a level that I had never faced myself before, as to like, okay, then what am I about? My best friend can't walk, so do I ditch her and go find another partner who can walk, or any of that kind of stuff, you know, or do we find a way to move through this together? And because the essence of our relationship did not change, it was just the physical aspect looked very, very different. I had to face some very deep and profound searching in my own self as to, like, what am I about? And the other thing that I realized at that time was that if this had happened to me when I was 18 years old or in my 20s or something like that, I probably wouldn't have stuck around in the relationship, because I wasn't that mature. I wasn't that deep. But this happened. We were in our 40s. And it was very different. And I had a much more life experience, and I was able to look at some of that stuff. But it wasn't easy. Facing oneself is never easy. I think Aikido faces us with ourselves. When we see our attitudes on the mat, we touch each other. I'm pissed off, and I'm taking it out on my partner, and I'm perpetrating my martial art on my partner and all that kind of stuff, which many of us have done and have done to us as well. We have to face that in ourselves if we're of the type that recognize it and are willing to face it. And it's not easy. It's never easy to look at ourselves and see the truth that is uncovered by all of the ideas and all the safety nets and all that kind of stuff. But to see the truth about oneself is not easy. And I think part of the alchemy of Aikido is it faces us, if we train long enough, and we're lucky, I guess, we come face to face with some of those very, very deep attitudes that need to be looked at for us to evolve and develop as conscious beings. And so all of this has happened and brought about in such a profound way. It would not have happened in this way had this event had not happened between and with the two of us.
I think
So-
Jeremy had to dance rather harder with his shadow than you did, Molly. But your light burns bright bothly, so fantastic. Kay, I think, had something to say. Sorry if I've got your name wrong, but would you like to talk?
It's a pleasure to be with all of you. Molly sent me a short note. I met her for the first time in San Mateo last September when Doshu came. Jeremy as well. I will not disregard you. I think you are a crucial part. For us, I have been in the IAF for almost 12 years. In 2010, when we had the combat games in Beijing, we had to choose one ambassador, as the organizers wanted to have someone representing the martial art. And we chose Lydia to go and represent Aikido, which I think we were the only ones that had someone represent the martial art on a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Since then, we formulated a working group around Lydia, and we discussed many items as to what to do. It's not that we're not paying attention. My joining in this on this occasion is perhaps a proof that I'm interested in trying to expand the level of inclusiveness. We are with a big task to increase the inclusiveness, because IAF was formed back in 1976, and in those days the Japanese Shihans were the powerful man occupying the majority of the federations, and the influence of the Japanese Shihans in the decision-making process was very strong. But gradually those Japanese Shihans have started to fade out. Some became sick, some passed away, and many of the local federations started to grow. But as a result of the Japanese disappearing, and also you can see a fragmentation of IAF, that US has more than 15 different Hombu recognized entities, Russia has over 20, and so on and so. So the biggest priority that we're trying to do is now trying to find ways to bring everybody under an umbrella in countries wherever we can. And about 2 weeks ago, we had the gender seminar, online seminar throughout Latin America. 17 female instructors taught the class. Many of them are not even members of IAF. And even before that, when we started Zoom class, Kyla Feather Sensei taught the class. And recently we had Patricia Hendrick Sensei joining. So we are trying to go outside the comfort zone of having friendship with members only. And Molly is already part of the working group of the disabilities group. Sorry for that name. If we need to change, we should do that. But with Lydia, I have discussed this issue with Wilco this morning. Wilco is the General Secretary of IAF, and we will try to find ways to level up our effort to promote people with certain disabilities or disadvantages, and be inclusive as well. So thank you for taking the time to send me one line. Here I am. I'm very happy to have listened to all of you. This is fantastic. And we have very active members, but as you can imagine, Aikido being a martial art of peace and harmony, there is a lot of ego, and I don't know what to say. Trying to bring everybody together is the difficult part, and we're trying to do that. So thank you.
Thank you for what you're doing to make that happen, and thank you for showing up.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm aware of the time. I think it's been a wonderful time. Thank you so much, Jeramy and Molly, for showing up and sharing, and making this evening.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any final questions or points you would like to make? Paul, of course.
Of course. Thank you. I've done a lot of work with people who've been abused, and one of the things that I found is the pelvis, as we all know, is a source of power, but they can't go there until after they've gone there to get their power to go there. See, and I'm hearing the same thing about other disabilities. I'm sure it must be the same with other parkies other than me. But how do you give people enough power that they can face their powerlessness and then be willing to work on it? I think that's a crucial question.
Do you have any answers?
Yes, I do, but they take a long time, as everything else I do says. I talk for a long time.
Okay, well, that might be a subject for another night. So
yeah, I'd be glad to talk to anybody who's interested.
Hold that thought. Julia, you had something you wanted to say, so please do. Just unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a wonderful talk and very enlightening, especially about the language of the way we express things in Aikido. But what I wanted to know really, Molly, is how important touch is. So when you touch someone I mean, I've only just started, as Dan knows, and I'm absent at the moment without leave because of COVID. But I do plan to come back, Dan, so don't worry. But the touch, sometimes when I touch people in the short time I was on the mat, you could feel sometimes like more aggression from people, or you could feel like love or caring. And when I felt sort of like more aggression, that's the bit that made me afraid, and think, oh, what's going to happen to me? I'm going to fall and hurt myself, kind of thing. But that wasn't the case most of the time. It was only just occasionally. And I thought that said a lot about the group that I'm in. Is I could feel this when I through the touch, the love and the caring. And Dan said it was really all about love and peace and harmony. And I did feel that. And how do you feel that? Do you feel that there's a difference when you touch people and what you can pick up?
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
Hugely. And I can actually feel it before there's even touch.
Ah.
Right? I can feel it coming towards me, and whatever that might happen to be. Body posture, whatever, but definitely the touch, it just says so much. It just says so much. One of my challenges when I'm teaching is that when uke comes in, if they come in and they grab me in a slightly different way with a slightly different energy, what comes out is just like automatic for me, and it may not be what I was intending to teach. It's always interesting, but it is the touch that connection that broadcasts so much.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. It's lovely to hear from you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to just finish by saying, if you don't watch the documentary, you are missing a treat. You really, really,
Absolutely.
should.
Yeah.
It's very
Quentin.
profound.
Quentin, my only question is, when are you getting Molly and Jeremy over to the UK?
We are already in discussions. We wait for post-COVID, and we'll see what we can
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, when those crazy Americans are allowed to go across the pond.
When you get yourself a sensible president, when you get one of those, you can come.
We're working on it. Trust me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very
I
much.
shouldn't have finished with a political note. I'm so sorry.
Oh, well, that wasn't
It's not political, it's mental health.
mental health.
Nice to meet you, Molly and Jeremy.
nice to
Lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you all for sharing and being.
Thank you so much, Julia.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
You're welcome every week. Okay.
Thank you, Molly and Jeremy. Good to see you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you,